In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, God is one. Christ is risen. Your prayers. Right, good morning, everybody. Let's see who is here. We have Anthony. Happy leave taking to you as well. And Gary, God bless you. Anthony's very fond of leave taking services. That's a bit like people who like sitting in a train facing away from the front, because you can always see where you've been. Rather than see where you're coming to. I find this behind, looking backwards in a train, I'm far less likely to get travel sickness as well. Oh dear. Let's see who else is here. I don't think that really works for services though. Morning, Christina. After Tony's report yesterday, getting overcast today. No, it is beautiful. We're on the eastern side of England. So that's about as far away from Ireland in the British Islands as you can get. And it rather looks as if the weather is going to go over Wales, over the monastery, and then up into Scotland and give them a good soaking. So it does look to be as if this particular weather front has got it in for all the Celtic people. And a wicked Saxon like myself is going to be spared. Okay. Yeah, Elizabeth, risen indeed. Dino, summer finally arrived, thank goodness. Your garden looks like a jungle. I rather like the look of a jungle garden. Some of the problems here in this church, I would like to turn it into a sort of exotic garden with bananas and palm trees and those huge rice paper plants and stuff like that. Lots of bright colours. And everybody else seems to think that the scorched earth policy is the best one. And it's constantly cutting everything right down, pruning things to like a child biting its nails. It's always better, therefore, for one person to be in charge of the garden. What am I saying? Oh yeah, I like it like a jungle, but we're not going to get it in this church. Not unless I poison everybody, and I'm not going to do that. Good morning, Jovan, God bless you. Anton, 11 years today since your surgery. Glory to God. That seems like only yesterday. My goodness. God bless you and keep you. Воистину воскреси. Christos воскреси. Father's making some tea. I was indeed. And here it is. Good morning, Ahmed. Inshallah, oh no, we're not seeing you this evening, are we? We have a prayer meeting Wednesday evenings. I am going to be there for this one. And in fact, I was planning to be in the monastery up to my eyeballs, so I will be at the monastery tomorrow morning. And God willing, therefore, we'll broadcast from there tomorrow, where it's going to be raining. Judy, good morning. Vicky, good morning. And Beverly, and Jovan. After feast, it's where no, not really. It's the leave taking is the last part of that feast. I guess that could be the after feast. Normally I would think of the after feast as being the remaining part of the feast. So there we go. Palm trees, yes, I love them. They remind me of my childhood. I miss that sort of thing. I was looking at a video of the village I grew up in Afghanistan just yesterday, and it made me feel unbelievably homesick. I try not to get homesick, but I did then. I felt terrible, really poorly. Okay, right, here we go. Onwards, John chapter 19, verses 8 through to 15. Becomes horrible, even worse. Yesterday we had a bit of a look at verse 8, but the rest of this doesn't make sense unless you've heard that therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, which was that Christ had made himself a son of God, and being a good Roman, this would have frightened him terribly, because it's very possible that all sorts of people could become a son of God, a god, and they themselves had elected Augustus as a god not long before. The current emperor, Tiberius, was never going to be elected as a god. He was too miserable. he should really have been a Russian. Russians are never quite as happy unless they're really miserable. Also, a Russian, how they are, they say, "I am still alive." Maybe they also prefer leave-taking feasts, Anthony. So maybe you should have been a Russian as well. Anyway, although Anthony is very cheerful. Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went into the praetorium and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have power to crucify you and power to release you?" A sign of a man who's not all that certain of his power, having to stress that twice. Jesus answered, "You could have no power at all against me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin." From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." Pilate therefore heard that saying. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus out and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." But they cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Then he delivered him to them to be crucified. And they took Jesus and led him away. So we're not going to do that verse 16 today. That we shall hang on to until tomorrow. Okay, so from yesterday, it's quite possible also that Pontius Pilate's wife had a say in all of this. We know from Matthew's Gospel that she sent a message to Pontius Pilate saying, "I have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have been much troubled in a dream about him." You remember that saying? That is really important when trying to understand this. Remember that John is not telling the whole story. He's only telling the bits that either others have left out, or the bits that actually show the Lord moving majestically towards his enthronement through his coronation, his recognition. John is picking up those people who are actually responsible for this coronation and death. And so far, it's everybody who's ever lived, represented by the Romans for the Gentiles and the high priests for the Jews. That's everybody. Okay? So it's wrong to pinpoint a particular person or people. Everybody. Some are more in the stew than others, but everybody is equally in that stew. Okay? So then we have verse 8. And went again into the praetorium, that's Pontius Pilate, and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have power to crucify you and power to release you?" That's interesting, isn't it? That the fathers of the church say, at this point, it's clear that Pilate condemns himself, and by condemning himself also condemns every other Gentile. The power is his. He has the ability to crucify Christ or release him. It's up to him. He has that authority and power. Jesus, though, points out that all power in the end is from above. And that's shocking, because therefore Pilate should have exercised this power that belongs to God in righteousness, and the same way as the Lord is exercising it in humility, in suffering, and in service. But Pilate, acting like a true bully, is saying, don't you know who I am? I can do this, I can do that, I can, you name it, I can do it. But the reality is, he can't do anything. And the Lord then says to him, Pontius Pilate, you're not as guilty, though, as those people who delivered me up to you. Now, we've got to go back in time. Do you remember that word, delivered up? Judas is talked of as delivering up the Lord. The high priests will deliver up to Pilate, and Pilate, in his turn, will deliver up the Lord, hand over, it says, to be crucified. Now, this is the word, it's paradidomi, and it has sacrificial overtones. The sacrificial lamb is delivered up to the priest to be sacrificed. And here we have the sacrificial lamb, Christ, being delivered up, paradidomi again, to be sacrificed as well. So we have to have that sacrificial understanding of what is going on. The high priest has delivered up Christ to be sacrificed to Pilate, and Pilate will deliver him up again over to the priests and to his soldiers to be sacrificed. Pilate hears this. From then on, Pilate sought to release him by the Jews, and we're talking there about the high priest, but also about the other people who came to Jerusalem for the feast, who feel let down now by the Lord not showing huge resistance against the Romans and smashing them to bits. But here we have really the high priests, and they cry out. Actually, it says scream out in Greek. Okay, it's a big word. Okay, they have one more weapon to use against Pontius Pilate, and this weapon is going to be decisive. Cried out, saying, "If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." Now that's a really interesting thing, this one final weapon they have. No friend of Caesar. We're not quite sure exactly what they mean here. It could be one of two things. The archaeology is not entirely obvious. The records are not there. We know that by around about AD 60, being a friend of Caesar was a title, an award that the Caesar could then pass on to somebody. Rather like nowadays, the Queen might give somebody an MBE, member of the British Empire. I've not really noticed the British Empire for a bit. I'm not quite sure how you can be a member of it anymore. Anyway, it's rather a ridiculous award, MBE and OBE and CBE. I'm not sure if there are any other BEs as well, British Empires. There must be the odd little island somewhere that still belongs to the British. Otherwise, a little bit of an absurd title. They should change it. My father used to call it OBE, Other Beggars' Efforts. So rather like an OBE, MBE, CBE, or maybe a knighthood. So you become Sir Pontius Pilate, okay? Or Pontius Pilate, MBE, for services to Roman Empire. Oh, this would be M-R-E, member of the Roman Empire. So knighthood, Sir Pontius Pilate. It was, so being a friend of Caesar was a title a bit like that. So Pontius Pilate, friend of Caesar, FOC. A sign of loyalty towards the emperor and the empire itself. We're not absolutely certain that those were handed out at that time, but it's possible. Quite possible, and there's a lot of academic discussion about this, which you can go off and read. It's easy enough found on the internet. And it's a bit like somebody nowadays coming along, I don't know, let's say Sir John Smith, Katie. It could be, let's say, call yourself Sir John Smith. So much for you. Call yourself a knight. And look at your loyalty towards the empire. That's one possibility. Now, a second possibility is this. Pontius Pilate had a friend in Rome called Sejanus. Sejanus was a rotten person, really. He was he had had quite a lot of sway over the Emperor Tiberius a few years before, and Tiberius had taken himself off to the island of Capri. He'd been elsewhere as well beforehand, but finally went off to Capri and settled on a peninsula at the end of the island of Capri. Actually had a headland where it was very difficult indeed to get to him, so nobody could climb up during the night over these cliffs and murder him. They had to get past his own guards and his own family. And he was absolutely certain that everybody was plotting against him. He was right, of course, they were. And that one day he would end up being poisoned or being suffocated. And he was right, of course, that's exactly what did happen to him. He was poisoned and suffocated, almost certainly by Caligula, who then succeeded him, who he had adopted as an official grandson. And Caligula then bumped off the other contender as well, in pretty short order. Okay, now Sejanus in Rome had himself been plotting to become the Roman emperor, and he had been executing people right, left, and center, and anybody who he thought might have half an eye on the imperial throne or might threaten him, because that, of course, is what he wanted to do himself. By 31 Anno Domini, Sejanus himself had been deposed and sidelined. I'm not even sure, he might have been killed by then. But anyway, he had been done away with and was no longer a problem to the emperor. And that meant three really rather important things for poor old Pontius Pilate. Number one, his very powerful friend back in Rome had gone. He was no longer a political force in his own right. So it's rather like cuddling up to the school bully and then discovering the school bully has been expelled. Okay, so that was him sent packing. So Pontius Pilate was now in a delicate situation. And of course, all of Sejanus's friends, ex-friends, now had both eyes of the emperor trained on him. Number two, the emperor Tiberius was even more worried at this stage about the possibility of being bumped off by one of those people who want to be emperor. And therefore, any tiny sign of somebody not being completely faithful to him would send him into paroxysms of fear, and he'd want them executed. And so he would have looked most unfavorably at Pontius Pilate had the Jewish high priest jumped off on a boat and gone hurrying off to go and see Tiberius to say, look, that guy over there, he let go a noted person who's calling himself a king, and saying, moreover, that he was a god. Okay? And thirdly, Pontius Pilate knew very well that he was a rotten, awful governor at the best of times. And these were not best of times. So he had plenty, Tiberius had plenty of good reasons to get rid of him anyway, let alone having been a good friend of Sejanus, and secondly, letting go a possible rival to Caesar, Tiberius. Okay? So there we go. Therefore, at this point, Pontius Pilate definitely feels that his career and his life are now threatened. He is sitting himself on a fairly shaky stool and might well get tipped over. Well, he has one final attempt at doing the right thing. He hasn't done much in the way of right things so far. You don't thrash innocent people nearly to death. But anyway, he has one final go. Verse 13. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, which is, whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar, he brought Jesus out and sat down in the judgment seat, in the place that is called the pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. And at this point, he's bringing the Lord out, showing it to all the people. This really, look at him. He's spent. This man has no authority. He is a figure of ridicule now. I have thrashed him nearly to death. What are you frightened of anymore? Nobody is going to follow somebody like this anymore, are they? He goes to a place called Pavement. It actually means, it's got a lovely name in Greek, which means covered in stones. So it would have had huge faced stones put down. Probably one of the few places in all of Jerusalem that did look like that, other than inside the temple. A large open area covered with beautiful stones. We're used to the idea now. So you might think like when you go to York and you see all those beautiful flagstones made of York stone all over the place. We get used to it like that. And that was enough and beautiful enough to give it its own name. We call it now the pavement, but the paved area. In Hebrew, it was called something quite different, Gabbatha, which means a bit like hilltop or high place. So it's hilltop or high place. And this is where Pontius Pilate was staying. And on that, he had a bema, a judgment seat, a slightly raised place, like a throne, really. And from the throne, he was meant to exercise justice. And that's the irony of it. So this glorious, beautiful place, high up, exposed to view, with a high up bema upon it, upon which Pontius Pilate, the representative of every Gentile ever to have lived and ever to live, sits upon the place from which he is due to exercise justice. Preparation day. So preparation day for the Passover, Friday, about the 6th hour, coming on towards midday. This has been going on quite long enough, thank you, probably 6 hours. And Pontius Pilate, he's had enough. You can also see that a riot is beginning. We know that from the other gospel writers. And the last thing he wants at this time is a riot. We've got all sorts of Jewish people all turned up now at the temple and in Jerusalem. And the last thing he needs is a riot to happen. That's why he's come there, to prevent a riot. And he definitely does not want Caesar to know that while he was there in charge, a riot took place. That would not be a good idea. So he says to them, "Behold your king." And he's absolutely correct. The Lord is indeed the King of Israel, God himself. That's what King of Israel means, God himself. Look back what we said about Samuel the day before yesterday, and you'll see what I'm talking about there. And they cry out. Actually, it's very moving if you read it in Greek. Okay, and actually, when it says they cry out, noon is also important because this is the time when the sacrificial lambs start being sacrificed. Okay, right the way through 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the main Passover lambs are being sacrificed. And so the sacrificial lambs are being brought to the temple. At this time, they'll be washed, they'll be cleaned, they'll be ready to be killed. Okay, and where it says they cried out here, the Greek means really they scream out. They shout at the top of their voices. And what do they shout out? Ekini, that one, him, Aaron, Aaron. Now, Aaron has a number of different meanings within there. Okay, it means it has a meaning that means lift up, as well as away with. So it's got this dual meaning: lift up and away with. And remember, the Lord said, "I will be lifted up." It goes again to this ano and kato business. I'm going to be lifted up. And the Jewish high priest and the others start shouting, Aaron, Aaron, lift up, or away with him. Okay? This one, raise him up. Stavros on afton. Crucify him. Okay? Thank you, Christos. There you got it there. So, this one, Ikinon, Aaron, Stavros on afton. Actually rolls off the tongue quite nicely as well. In English, it's difficult to translate it directly. Raise him up, or away with him. Crucify him. And that is the second part of it. Okay, so you have the high priest himself takes the knife in his hand, and he is the one who chooses to do the slaughtering. Okay, really important. I'm just seeing what Christina has said. There's significance sitting down to proclaim judgment rather than standing up. It's exactly the same as happens now in British courts anyway. When the person is going to be sentenced, they are, of course, to stand up. The judge sits, and in a sitting position on the seat of judgment, he gives his judgment. He gives his sentence. It is a sentence, one sentence, and that then determines what's going to happen to the prisoner. You also find within the culture of the times that the important person sat, everybody else stood. It's rather like if you look at pictures of our Queen, or for that matter, old pictures of churches. The only seat that had arms on it was the one for either the Queen or for the bishop. The bishop in Orthodox churches has arms because he also stood in the position of the emperor. Thus his Byzantine clothing of the emperor and the crown that he wears on his head. But actually, this idea of sitting was the authority. You are the authority. If you look at pictures of our Queen as well, you'll see that she usually sits with her legs crossed and everybody else with their legs not crossed. And that again goes back to the Byzantine emperors, that they could sit with their legs crossed in place of absolute relaxation. But everybody else, if they were sitting at all, had to sit to attention, legs uncrossed. All these funny little things that roll down the centuries. How absurd. Anyway, that's what happens. So they scream back, Raise him up, raise him up, crucify him. And then we have at this point the most horrific thing in the entire Bible. Okay, you might think that there's something more horrific to come, but there isn't actually. This is the most horrific thing because it goes right to the very heart of the chief priests, to their hearts. Who do they worship? And they say, we have no king but Caesar. So, bearing in mind that the king of Israel is God, and they will know that, they're well aware that God is their king, and therefore had they said, we have no king but God, this would have been excusable, because after all, the Lord did not look much like a god, let alone God. But here we have this other business. They say we have no king but Caesar, and they're still, Pontius Pilate says, shall I crucify your king? We have no king but Caesar. So this is the final, definitive, absolute apostasy of the high priesthood. They fall away completely from everything that they should be about. And rather than following God and recognizing him and enthroning him upon the Holy of Holies in the temple, they demand that he is taken out and crucified even outside Jerusalem, where by tradition the tree of life grew, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil just outside there, Mount Moriah, just along from the temple. Okay, it's only a tradition, but it's a nice pious tradition, even though complete nonsense. Okay, so we'll end there. Let's see if anybody is saying anything. We shall have a look. I. Blah blah blah. Palm trees. Anthony thinks that he'll make a good ration. We'll have to start drinking vodka, Anthony. Good morning from the Celtic nations. Yes, that's Malingeth. And from our jungle garden, there are jungle gardens that are planned to be that way and jungle gardens that turn out that way. I think perhaps we can say that you have rewilded your garden. And I love that. I love that because it does actually fill the whole place with all sorts of interesting things. It is wonderful to see the bees out, except that I'm extremely allergic to bee stings, so I have to carry around little injectors with me wherever I happen to be. Good morning, Thekla. God bless you. St. Anne and All Saints, grandfather, less complimentary than my father. Oh, OBE's exit. Yeah, the prize for being thrown out. Morning, Natalia and Christos. Thank you very much indeed. What a significance sitting down. We've done that. Thank you, Christos, for the translation, for the original rather. This is the meaning of Jesus sitting at the right hand of the Father? Yes. It's a position of authority. God the Father does not have any right hand or left hand, but it shows a position of authority. God bless you, Dina, your prayers. Yes, you will see me this evening, God willing, at prayers, and I'll bring the things we need. I need to lead them to somebody. Anton, you'll be lucky to be picking coconuts anytime soon, unless global warming really does go cracking along. God bless you, Lena. I don't know who you are, but God bless you. I always reminds me of that she wears red feathers and the hula hula skirt whenever I think of coconuts, in which case you have to pronounce it cookie nuts. So I think that always makes you laugh. I used to sing that about a friend of mine, Philippa. She once wore this skirt to church, which was bright red. And so all of her friends sang this outside the church for her. Really not to tease or embarrass her, though it did, and that was a pity. But she used to have it as a bit of an anthem of herself after that. Okay, right, God bless you, keep you. Please carry on praying for each other. I still have no message about young Joseph Paul, but I shall ask today. Okay. We'll see you this evening. You who live abroad, well, I'm abroad here. I was born in Africa and grew up in Asia. And then I went abroad and I came here. I decided to, well, if you get on the monastery website, you'll see that we're trying to sell beads to the natives. We haven't quite got round to firewater yet, and I don't think we'll be selling any guns, but we're doing our best. Okay, God bless you, keep you. Amen.